Welcome to Season 4 of Outstanding Women Leaders, Witty and Wise Conversations. I'm your host, Katie L. Leeds, founder and chief owl at Outstanding Women Leaders Owl Professional Coaching, an organization dedicated to empowering women leaders to rewrite their story and reconnect to who they are. Owl is on a mission to host 100 million witty and wise conversations that disrupt the way leaders think and inspire you to disrupt business as usual in your brain. The disruption begins with a set of rules to guide our conversation today. Nobody gets to be wrong. Nobody gets to be right. Everybody gets to be vulnerable. And my favorite rule, everything is included. So kids walk in, phone rings. We do not edit here. This podcast is exactly what it needs to be in this moment in time. We've asked our guests to join us via video to allow us to create authentic connection. Eyes are the window to the soul. You will be seen here. You will be heard. There is space for you. When this conversation comes to a close, I will ask our guests 3 questions. If you've tuned in before, you know what they are. And if you haven't, you don't want to miss them. So stick around because today's amazing, outstanding woman leader is an original Philly Jawn. Did I say that right?
That's pretty close. Yeah.
Karema Akilah has played many roles on the stage of her life. Her past titles include Morgan State University HBCU grad, public school teacher, wife, mother of TheHalfDozen, unschooling mom, and widow. Karema's current leading role is a visionary founder of the Genius School, clearly a place where I belong, a 5-pillar genius community, and say this for me, Genii Dow? Genii Dow.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
The Genius School is a decentralized network of micro self-directed learning communities in the metaverse and internationally in real life. Genii Dow is a decolonizing parenting, deschooling, and unschooling community of adults and kids using Web3 tools and a shared crypto treasury to accomplish whatever goal they create. Can't wait to learn what all of that means. A creative problem solver and visionary, Karema is a curious entrepreneur who analytically interprets content to facilitate and lead others bravely into fresh experiences. Her interests included, but are no means limited to, redefining Mondays with her children, Bach to Badu. I am so pumped about this because this totally is my range of music as well. Reading material that requires a dictionary, international travel, writing in cute leather-bound notebooks, and sitting in the sun under her favorite live oak tree. It's no wonder I was drawn to just what you've put on everything in your website because I connect to all of this. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Me too. I wish that we had recorded our first conversation because it was just where I got to really learn your story, and I can't wait to share that. I'm chomping at the bit to dive into your school, but for everyone listening, you have to hear this woman's amazing story first. So I'm just going to not talk for a while. Tell us.
Well, and I'll keep it exciting yet concise. So my story, right? How did we even get to having this conversation? So as you said, and you did it pretty well, right? I am an original Philly Jawn, and you guys say it like that. And for those of you who don't know what a Jawn is, a Jawn can be anything. I am from Philly, so therefore that's how I identify. And it was shortly after I graduated from Morgan State University, only the best HBCU in the world, the national treasure, as we call it.
And you're my second guest from that school, right?
Really? From Morgan State? Maybe so.
No, you were from the same sorority, Kashan? Yes. Sorry, my mistake. Same sorority. I got to introduce you guys though, but all right.
And for anyone who's listening, that famous sorority is only the first and finest, the sorority of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And yes, I was initiated at Alpha Delta at Morgan State. I also got married my senior year at Morgan. And my husband and I have 6 kids. And it was when that oldest one was born. He was born in December. And we did not want to put him in school there. He was already reading, and putting a little Black boy in Baltimore City Public Schools that was already reading, that was a recipe for a problem. So that began our official homeschooling journey. And I have to tell you, Katie, I did a really good job of using my degree and a really good job of recreating school in my home, to the point where I had the children dressed in uniforms to come to the dining room table. They looked like they worked at Target or Walmart with their khaki pants. It was a mess.
Now, I have a question for you. Did you work
Mhm.
in a public school as a teacher before homeschooling?
I did.
So as a public school teacher, you knew that schools were not for your child, public school.
We were living. I didn't teach where I lived.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I knew that it wasn't for him. We were living in Baltimore City, and that was not the place to put they would not allow him to test to see if he could go into a different, grade or reading program or whatever. So that's how we began officially homeschooling. And I did a really good job, like I said, of recreating school in my home. I had the schedule and the calendar, and I was following the curriculum as if my life depended upon it, because I thought that this perfect curriculum would get me perfect kids. And of course, we know that didn't work. So while we were academically successful, we were doing the worksheets and the workbooks, and we had that classical education, and we were doing that. And my kids had good grades, and we had stacks of completed curriculum all over the house. But who we were being, Katie, that wasn't working, my kids were being lethargic. They were very compliant, but they were disengaged. And who I was being was, I always felt like a failure. I always felt like I was behind in some way, right? That something was missing. And I kept chasing the next curriculum, right, to find it. But what I was seeking was joy in learning, curiosity. I was seeking trust. I was seeking the ability to trust that the curiosities of my children and them being authentic was enough. And you ain't gonna find that in any curriculum. So I invented that as a possibility for my children to be curious, to be trusted that their curiosity was enough, and for us to be joyful. But I wasn't giving up altogether. So I said, okay, guys, I had to put on my TV voice to sell it, right, to kids. I said, all right, listen, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna have classical mornings and delight-driven afternoons. Right.
I love this so much. And I know where the story is going, but we got to just pause, and we have to just love this so much. Because sometimes you got to crawl before you walk. And so, right? So the classic mornings of academics, curriculum, it's like having you're like, let's just do the best of both worlds. And then, right? So we'll stick with this.
Yep.
And it's like, we can't, and I love how you get to the eventual unschooling. And for people that wonder, well, how do you really only need 4 hours to get an 8-hour workday done, right? We all know that in corporate.
Right.
So I love that you create, and what you created was amazing, even though you eventually do something else.
If that's my Wi-Fi. Oh,
I'm back. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Go ahead. So you said you love that. What?
I love the classical mornings where I love the blend. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just know where you're going with it. And I'm like, I would just do that. Why do I need to go further?
Well, okay, right. And the same thing, right? So I was going to do that we were going to rock that out, right? Classical mornings and delight-driven afternoons, which meant in the afternoon, the kids were in charge. I saw the light come back on, right? In the morning, they would sit like this. And they were compliant, and they would do the worksheets, but there was no joy, there was no curiosity. Then in the afternoon, they got to be curious and learn whatever they wanted. I became their assistant, and we would have continued that, but kids are really smart. They're smarter than we are. And one morning I come downstairs with the curriculum in the crook of my arm, right, ready to do our classical mornings. And these kids have begun delight-driven afternoon before breakfast. And so
what does that look like? What does that look like? So how do you know that all of a sudden they're delight driven in the morning before breakfast?
Because I see, what changed was that in the morning when I was in charge and I was teaching them traditionally, there was no light, there was no joy, there was no passion, there was no self-drivenness. That was not present. All I got was obedience and compliance. I got robots. I got kids filling out a form, filling out a worksheet because I told them to. In the afternoon, I saw self-starters. In the afternoon, that autodidact, right? That learner that is self-driven and inspired without outside motivation. So that's how I knew that they were doing delight. I saw the delight. That's why it's called delight driven. Whatever it is that delighted them, that's what they were driven to do. So what it looked like in real life, I had a kid, my number 3, he's my nature boy. He wanted to create something for some worms or some salamander or something. And he needed to figure out the area of a space. Now, I just taught that in a curriculum like 2 weeks ago. He sat and did the whole thing, right? Got an A on the test, right? He learned it, but actually he didn't. I did a good job of teaching it, but he didn't learn it then. He learned it now because he said to me, Mom, how do I figure out the space again? What is that thing called again? And I said, the area. You just took a whole test on it. He said, yeah. But I need it now. How do I do it now? And I said, oh, this is when you're going to learn it. And so that morning when I came downstairs and they had started delight-driven afternoons before breakfast, the teacher in me said, make them stop, take that curiosity off your face, wipe away that delight. It is not time for that. It is time for me to teach you. But the mother in me said, if I stop this, I will be stopping true learning just for the sake of teaching. And that's when our deschooling process, the shredding of the programming and habits that resulted from other people's agency over your time, body, thoughts, and actions, that's when deschooling really shifted into unschooling or self-directed learning. That's how we got there.
And that is how adults learn on the job, not in college. You were a teacher. I know you did student teaching just like I did.
Yeah.
And my student teacher left the room. He was a coach, shocker, history teacher. This guy was a coach. And so he left me alone. But and I learned a lot, but where I really learned to be a teacher was from my students teaching me how to be a teacher.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's right. And so we really began, and it was hard for me. I'll be honest. My deschooling process was like detox. It was like the restructuring and the rewiring of my brain. It was someone was pulling at the thread of everything that I knew to be true and right? That I'm the teacher. This is the body of content that these kids need to learn. And so for me, it wasn't a pleasant experience. It felt like a free fall, like getting to nothing when you are excavating your brain out of all of that stuff that other people say someone should learn, when they should learn it, how they should learn it. But soon I began to get comfortable in that nothing, to make the expectations of learning mean nothing. It took a minute for me to get comfortable with that. But when I did, that's when I saw my children speak authentically to the nothingness, right? It was empty and void, if you will. And my kids spoke to that, what was authentic to them. And then I began to see their genius. So shortly after that, my husband became sick with leukemia. And so then that began an hour-long drive to the hospital, a 6 to 8 hour stay for blood work and chemo, and then an hour drive back every other day. So I was away from home during this period of time, and the kids were at home. My teenagers were older teens at that time, and they were living living their best lives, right? Doing and whatever was authentic to them, really diving deep into this freedom. And it was during that time that our unschooling way of life became solidified, because I wasn't there to mess it up, first of all, right? And then when he passed away in 2016, that's when I said, okay, now wait, we have been living this way now for a minute. What do I do? What do families do if you want your children to experience self-directed learning, but there's no one that can stay home with them? What do you do? So that led me to research other learning communities or options or schools. And so I found, the ones like Sudbury School, right? Shout out to all my Sudbury friends in the world, Agile Learning Centers, and they are offering 100% non-compulsory learning. And I said, okay, I want that. But then when I looked at, okay, where are these schools? Who's here? And I saw these four main problems, Katie, that exist with these schools. And my mama said I could either be part of the problem or part of the solution. So I decided to be part of the solution. And that solution meant solving the four main problems, which were number one, a lack of awareness and accessibility. People think that only homeschoolers can learn this way. Some people don't know that there are actual schools where you can drop off your kid 5 days a week, and those kids can be in charge of their own learning. Then where are these schools, right? It's not like they are 30 minutes away all of the time. For some people, it's, an hour plus drive. And then what if you live in a foreign country where this way of learning is not even imagined? So then once you do find a school, well, now you got to pay tuition because these schools are more often than not private schools. And the reason for that is in some states, if you are a homeschooler, so that you can offer this freedom, but you have to go to work. You cannot drop off your kids somewhere 5 days a week in some states. And I wanted to create a solution that worked everywhere. So funding, right? Funding is a problem on both sides, Katie. You have some families that cannot afford tuition, but then you have some people who work in these schools that are not earning a living wage. That doesn't work. Then what about documentation? If there's no one centralized curriculum, how are you going to know what everyone's doing? I felt that problem with my 6 kids. I'm in a hospital with my husband. I'm not at home to chase around everything that they're doing and, take a picture of that. So while I'm sitting in the hospital with my kids, with my husband, my kids call me and I'm asking them, what they're doing, and they're having a ball, right? And I'm yelling over the phone. I'm like, guys, you got to write down what you're doing because the evaluator's coming at the end of the year. You think they wrote something down? They didn't write down a thing. So then when I hung up the phone, I said, I wish there was a way that they could take their phone, take a picture or video of whatever learning they're doing that inspires them, add a description, like a narrative, slap a school subject on it, like where would this fit? Is this history? Is this math? Is this, science, whatever? And then what if they could also tabulate the amount of time that they spend on it so that this one app can create a transcript for them and then send it to either college admin or their homeschool evaluator. To which I heard a little voice say, well, why don't you build that? And I said, oh, I could do that. I could do that. And so that's one of the solutions that we have. And then finally, diversity. As you can see, I'm brown all day. And in many of these schools, I didn't see myself. I didn't see children who looked like me. I didn't see school founders who looked like me. But then I also didn't see neurodivergent children, nor did I see a space for medically fragile children. If we're offering consent in learning, then shouldn't that also be available to all kids? What if your child is nonverbal? How do you do that? But then what about people in foreign countries? I don't see these types of schools there. Are they not worthy of learning and freedom? And so I set out to not only create a school, but to do it in such a way that addressed those four main problems. And so we came up with our 4 solutions.
Hanging on every word. Tell me more.
So the first problem, awareness and accessibility. So our first solution is to create a brand. When I looked at these schools, I didn't see that. I didn't see a consistent brand, nor was there a consistent way to go about opening up a community if you wanted to do that. So we created a brand. That's what the Genius School is. And we also created the Genius Directorship. So anybody, wherever you are in the world, if you find alignment with our distinctions, authenticity, liberation, creation, and community, then you can open up a 5-pillar genius community right there in your neighborhood. So that's number 1, creating that genius directorship to solve the problem of accessibility. Therefore, more and more people have an opportunity to find a school closer to them because more and more people are being trained on how to open one. Then the next biggie, funding. Now, Traditionally, these schools are funded by either parent tuition or nonprofit fundraising. And that is working as well as it's working, right? Because there's still families that are struggling, still schools that are struggling. So I said, well, we got to look at something else. So we're looking at Web3 tools such as cryptocurrency. We created our own DAO, the Genii DAO. The DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization, which just some big fancy words that just simply means a group of people who meet together over the internet and in real life who have a common purpose and a shared crypto treasury. And we utilize the tools of blockchain and crypto in order to solve problems. So for funding, we are, in addition to using, traditional, what we call now Web 2, right? Web 2 fundraising through nonprofit and all that. We're also using Web 3 decentralized finance tools. Now, I know to some people that may sound a wee bit scary. I get that. But hey, we're going to figure it out. Because
I'm like, you're a genius. This sounds amazing and incredible. I'm come from a fundraising background and an education background. So I'm like, where did this woman come from and why does she want to be on my podcast? She's amazing. You like created this whole thing. I like to be self-deprecating when I'm giving compliments. That way I can make it a little bit about me, only child over here. So let me just slow down for my own brain and for other people. So you took a look at sharing a crypto community where you can make money in your crypto to fund the things you want to fund.
Yep.
And that's right, she says. And how does one do that?
How does one do that? Well, first, before we get to that, I also want to mention too, outside of Web3, the other thing that we're doing for funding is we're putting something in the building that provides for greater community shared investment. What do I mean by that? Meaning putting in a maker space, putting in a co-working space, right? So when the kids go home, that physical building now provides an additional revenue stream. There's so many opportunities now with purespace.com, I believe it's called, where you can take your physical space and you can rent it out for events, kind of similar to Airbnb, but not for people, with the overnight stay. So that's what we're doing with that, right? Now, into Web3. How do you do that? Well, a couple of ways you can do that. Number one, through NFTs. So Katie, you will actually be the first one that we will announce publicly that we will be rolling out our NFTs, I'll say late spring. We're hosting an event for our igniters. These are people who are thought leaders in this space of unschooling and deschooling and liberation parenting. And we're hosting an event and they will be the very first ones to receive an igniter NFT. But then we will soon make the public sale available probably around late spring, early summer. So that's one way that people can begin funding a project in Web3 by the purchase of our NFT. And for those of you who are like, NF, what is she talking about? An NFT is a non-fungible token. And I don't want to get too deep into Web3, but I will say that it will require you to have a wallet address, right? Something in MetaMask you can go to open up a wallet, and you would take your credit card, right? And you will put your fiat money into that wallet so that you can then purchase in the Web3 crypto space. So that's the process of how that works. And we'll offer some classes to show people how to do that. So that's one, too.
Yep. I love all the schooling that I'm getting from you today on the Unschooling podcast. And that's why I'm so excited to have you on.
Yeah, so this one, and then real quickly, just to wrap up that Web3 funding. So the NFTs, and then eventually we'll have our own token. And then finally, we are looking at a crypto hedge fund. Now, I know if people are not freaked out by, the idea of an NFT, they're really going to be freaked out by the idea of a crypto hedge fund. However, there are products that have been in existence for years, because the biggest fear is that people, because this space is, as some people say it, unregulated, right? That people will take your money and run with it. And there have been bad actors. But the last time I checked, there's been bad actors in traditional finance as well. So it's
Yes,
okay.
they just have fancy titles like CEO.
Exactly. It's okay. I'll be the first one to put my toe in the deep end and, see what happens and make it work. And if whatever we learn, we learn. But we've got to look at all ways to fund this next movement of learning, because self-directed learning is postmodern education. It is what everyone is trying to do, but they're still trying to figure out these key pieces: funding and documentation.
So you build a business plan. Clearly, you've done some market research. Clearly, walk us through a little bit of, how do you build a business plan, a strategy? Like, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? Like, how did you take a look at approaching all of this?
Oh, well, really trial and error. I look at what people want. In business, you look at the three things. Is this a problem for you? Is this a problem that you're willing to pay for, right, for the solution of it? And if so, how much? And then you take that, and something really unique happened before pandemic. It was a challenge because the awareness was very small, right? So I felt like I was, screaming out into a hurricane prior to pandemic.
That's right. Where I left off with your story was that January, you launched your business. Same for me too.
Yep.
And then pandemic. And man, did the pandemic really blow open the doors and eyes wide open on schools.
It did, because everyone became a homeschooler to some degree, right? If your kid was still registered with the public school, but you were doing it at home, right? And so during that time, what parents thought was happening when they sent their kids to school, when the parents went to work, they couldn't deny what was actually happening because they could hear it, they could see it. And that's when parents said, "Oh, what? Is there something else?" And you had so many, to the point now that some states, some cities, and some states are really concerned about the number of kids that have not returned to public school because they are choosing to homeschool. Parents saw that what they once thought was unattainable for them, we can actually make this work. You're going to go over mama's house on Tuesday and Wednesday. Auntie going to pick you up on Tuesday and Thursday, and then I got you on Friday. Yeah. And so they figured it out, which for me, not only were their eyes open to homeschooling, but their eyes were even open to self-directed learning, which is a distinction that's different, right? Because you could be a homeschooler like I used to be and still bring school at home. Or you can be willing to do this thing. You could be courageous enough to trust your children. And that is what's beginning to happen. So for a business model, what was once challenging, because I felt like I was going against the grain, now it's like the floodgates are open.
Yeah.
And so now consciousness and awareness is there, and people are now looking at, okay, so I want this. Now we need a building, and now we need to fund it.
Consciousness is there. And, for me, I have wanted to fix the broken school system, and would feel very much like you would have felt pre-pandemic of doing anything different than fixing a broken system is just spitting in the wind, right? It's like voting for the third party candidate, even though we look at, what made America great was that Lincoln was a third party candidate, guys. And the history teacher, and just really would love to see something shaken up a little bit.
Yeah.
And where I continue to be so horrified, and that's the only word I have for it, particularly even this week, in seeing teachers, is how they talk to their students. We are in the relationship business for anyone listening that's a teacher. And please remember that you're in the relationship business. The real work in corporations and in schools is still relationships.
Yeah.
And this is where damage is done for students and where school doesn't really feel applicable in the postmodern world.
Yep.
And it's an industrialized creation, public schools.
But it's the context, right?
Yeah.
So like when we talk about the teachers, and shout out and love to all of the teachers,
Sure.
all my teacher friends, right? And I get it.
Absolutely.
We have this context called public education, and it got created, when and how it got created for the purposes that it was created. But then we have the content on the inside, which those relationships that you talk about, that's where that happens between the teachers, the parents, the kids, and the community. Now, the odd thing is, I have my glass here so I can use it. This is the context that we are fighting. The content inside is fighting and pushing against the walls of this context. But this context is saying, I don't know why you're mad. You know what it is. You know what it is. We all know why this whole thing got created. I'm created to do this. And this is what I do, right? Now, the frustration comes when the content is now ready for something different. And so it either has to fight against and change the context, or the content has to step outside of the context and create something different. True transformation comes when we're not trying to change something, when you leave it just as it is and you bring nothing to it. It's fine just the way it is, because this is what it was created to do and be. But then if you really want to transform it, then step outside of that, leave that like it is, bring nothing to that. And then from nothing, now we can really create something brand new. And so I get that fight and that struggle. And while there can be a little bit of shift and change in there, that context was meant to be what it was meant to be.
That is the most beautiful way I've ever heard that described. Thank you so much for that. That is, you're 100% correct. Of course, you know that. And I love what you're creating, and also beyond that, just what you're inspiring in others to think outside of the context and take risks.
Mm-hmm.
So you saw 4 problems that you're addressing. And before we get back to them, something else I was so drawn to you by is because I always say to my clients, first you be, then you do, then you have. And I go to your website. I'm like, she took the words out of my mouth. They're right there. I'm like, I know what her training is, but it's got to be somewhere along the line. We had something we both read because. And so your being.
Yes.
I just love that you looked at how your kids were being. And when we think about that, and what do you want them to be versus when we think about education, we're always thinking about what we want them to have and what we want them to do afterwards. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that before I forgot that thought. So 2 problems. So you're solving the awareness and accessibility. You're solving the funding problem. And
so the funding problem, the awareness, accessibility, diversity, and documentation. So for diversity, I simply look at who's not here. And then I go and intentionally invite them. So prior to pandemic, and you're right, now we got to split our lives into, in the before times and then, pandemic, right? Prior to pandemic, I didn't see a lot of people of color in these schools, nor did I see people of color founding and starting these schools. You also didn't see neurodivergent children. You didn't see medically fragile children. You didn't see these types of schools in rural areas here in the United States, and you for surely didn't see them in foreign countries. So I simply look at who's not here, and then I make a phone call, send an email. Hey, what difference would this make for your community? So for instance, I met some families who have medically fragile children who are nonverbal. How do you manage consent with a nonverbal child, right? And so I listen to parents. What do you need in a physical space if your children are neurodivergent? I listen, and then they tell me what they need, and then we go create it. We have 2 communities in Kampala, Uganda. Can I tell you, the mind-blowing work that they're doing there, it is still common practice to beat children in school. And when I was talking to our genius director there, one of them is Miss Connie and Miss Harriet. Miss Harriet said when she first opened up her genius community there, she had some toys. Children were walking by, and these are kids that cannot afford to pay for the government school, meaning they cannot afford to buy a uniform, which means they can't go to school. I'm gonna say that again. They cannot afford to purchase a uniform. We ain't talking tuition. We're not talking about, trying to pay the teacher. They can't even buy a uniform, therefore they can't go to school. So these are kids who are 13, 14, 15, have never been to school, don't know how to write their name, right? So she opens her door, whosoever will, let them come. Little girls came in, they saw some little toys there. They said, excuse me, miss, can we play? She said, sure. They came in, started playing, but they were looking at her. They would play, then they would look at her. And she was trying to figure out what they were doing. And so one of the little girls said, excuse me, miss, can I go get my friend? Can I go get my sister? And she said, of course. When the children left the building, they ran through the street saying to their friends, come to this school, they don't beat. Mm. And when she told me that, it took a minute for my Americanized brain to understand the significance. So when I say that we're here to make a difference, I'm talking about in places where the idea of decolonizing parenting, because that's at the root, and I want to be crystal clear about that. People come to unschooling, self-directed learning looking for an academic solution. But freedom is not something that can be tethered. Freedom isn't something, as I learned, right, trying to have delight-driven afternoons. Delight, freedom, and joy isn't something that will only exist from here to here. It demands to be expressed everywhere at all times. And if parents have not taken the time and done the work to have this type of relationship with their children, then when they send them to these types of schools, it won't be sustainable. Either they will snatch their kids out of that school, or they will go to that school and force limitation on the freedom that their kids experience there, because they're not willing to give their kid consent, choice, and voice at home. So our genius directors in Kampala are doing that work, and it is foreign to the ears of the people in Kampala. And that's the difference that we're making. So in addition to diversity, then you have documentation, right? And so I was telling you about the app. So the app is here. The Genie app is ready, is finally ready. And it's in our beta launch. So those are our 4 problems. Our 4 solutions are the Genius Directorship and the Genius brand. What we're putting inside of the building as far as the makerspace or co-working space, and then our Web3, decentralized finance. We have the app, and then we are intentionally inviting communities that are not present to consider.
Are you familiar with human design?
A wee bit, but say more.
Yeah. So I really believe in, when I coach people, it's, the way your water flows is the way your water wants to go. Mm-hmm. And if your water is flowing too fast, i.e. you can't meet deadlines at work, the things that happen for adults, then we take a look at, where does your water need to go? Where does your water want to go? And then how do we bring them together so that you can flow? Mm-hmm. And human design is my favorite tool to use for parents to understand their children's water and flow, and for them to also understand their own. So modern, world psychology tells me that I'm this way because of these things my parents did and these traumas that happened. And my human design shows me, well, my parents were both emotional authorities, and I am wide open. So I'm a sacral authority. Ironically, my world is about opening up the gray, but I'm a black and white authority. My truth is only in the now. And I also have this area that's completely open, so no definition, which allows me to take in everything. And as a child, if I don't know that, and I also have 2 parents that are emotional, so their authority comes from their emotions and riding their wave. It's said right in there, like, you'll believe it's your job to make them happy, and you'll believe that it's your responsibility and to tiptoe around and all of that, versus understanding that I'm meant to dip my toe into the stream of emotions for information only. Yes. And so using human design for parenting, only 8% of people are manifestors, but those kids are out there. Yeah. And for those kids, their job is not to answer questions. Their job is to inform. So you tell those kids, your teeth are dirty
Mhm.
versus did you brush your teeth, or you have
Mhm.
homework, you have your armpits stink, you inform them, you versus asking them. And
Mhm.
and their not self is anger and their true self is peace, where for 70% of us, our not self is frustration and our
Mhm.
true self is satisfaction. And so it really gets you down all the way to your DNA code of like when you were born, this was the path that you were gonna, I mean, you can get really woo-woo with it.
Mhm.
But what I find is it really helps people, because as soon as you read it, they're like, yeah, that's me. And you're like, it helps people really embrace their flow of their water.
Mhm.
And it becomes so quick of letting go of society's things that they've put on
Yep.
you, because
Yep.
you feel seen, you feel heard, and also it's just like, oh yeah, this is how I am, and here's
Mhm.
how I make that work. So as the diagnosis of ADHD for me at 39, um, everybody wants to throw 85 strategies at you
Mhm.
and frameworks versus, and that's just not how I'm designed to take everybody's stuff. So I already was like, well, this is how my flow works. So now
That's right.
right. So now my notebooks have tabs, and I don't need to worry about, because I have 85 notes everywhere.
That's
And I
right.
just, yeah. And I look at how my water wants to flow. My water wants to put clothes on this chair in my bedroom, but I also want
Mhm.
it
Yep.
not be cluttered. So what I
Yep.
did though is, so I moved the chair out of my bedroom so that there,
Uh-huh.
right, so that wasn't in my water.
You are. Yeah.
And then I have this closet now with this little space where I set those same clothes that used to die on my chair. So whether or not the bed is made in my bedroom is here or there, but the chair is no longer there for things to die. And that was a way for me to, embrace my own natural flow of water.
That's right. That's it. That is so beautiful. And you're right. It is something to be responsible for letting go of whatever is in the way of us allowing ourselves to show up authentically, and then allowing others, including children, to show up authentically. And it took me a minute, right, during my deschooling, decolonizing parenting work to get to that place. And there's something there around consent and expectation, that I have an expectation for how others should be, how my children should be. And the reason why I don't want to give my kids consent and allow their water to flow the way that it flows is because I've made their success mean my success, or I've made their failures mean my failures. And because it's all about me, then I have to control. Therefore, I'm not going to give you consent, because you might not do, your water may flow in a way I don't want it to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the fear of society is, what if your water flows yourself to homelessness?
Mhm.
What if the water isn't good? And human design says that neither design is good or bad.
That's right.
It just
Just
is.
is. It
And
is what it
also,
is.
here are your superpowers. Here are the gifts that you have to bring.
Yep.
So a couple questions I have before we wrap up. As you look back at your journey, because you're launching some new journeys, would your kids have learned to read if you had done this as, in kindergarten or first grade? Now your kid, you're brilliant. Would the non-kid that's reading it, 1 year old or however old your child was reading, like, how
Mhm.
do they
Yeah.
learn those things? Yeah, go.
So actually, that's a great question. So my youngest one, who is 12, he was born into this way of learning. And, by the time his dad passed when he was 5. And so during that whole year, we were already unschooling, so there wasn't going to be any official, phonics lesson. But he taught himself to read. I didn't know that he knew how to read until he was probably about maybe 9 or 8. And he read something. It was like a bag in my room, and he read it. And we were like, wait, you're literate? Like, when did that happen? But I also have a child that's dyslexic. And I also want to be responsible for this too, because of the neural divergence that we all have to one degree or another. When I say self-directed learning, I do not mean hands-off. I do not mean that you leave the kid alone and you live in one room, they live in another, and you're not aware of where they are and the support that they need. My youngest one was very self-aware, and he said, Mom, I don't want to learn how to read. I said, oh. He said, I don't want to learn how to read. I want to learn numbers first. I said, okay. But he found what was relevant to him. So one day he came to me, he said, Mom, I want to learn how to read these words, only these words, Mom. Don't get all excited, okay? Don't whip out the, the hooked on phonics situation. I don't want that. I just want to learn how to read these words. I said, what are the words? He said, can you write them down? They are on and off, up and down, left and right. I said, on, off, up, down, left, and right. He said, yes. He said, Mom, can you write those down? I wrote them down, showed them what they were. He said, okay, I got it. He ran back to the basement, waving the paper. He said, guys, I can play the game now. I know how to read. And again, relevance, right? So yes, children would have learned, my kids, anybody else's kids would have learned how to read without forcing them. When they see the relevance of it, then they will come and ask you. And if there is something there to be responsible for with their neurodivergence, like if they're dyslexic, then when they ask and you tell them, then you'll be able to see, oh, I see that you need a little bit more support, or this is how you would learn those words.
Thank you. That's such a great way to describe that. And when I think from the human design perspective, people with open roots like feel this pressure. Mm-hmm. And things have to happen on their own time. And what I heard in your story is that you are not the parent that's freaking out that their kid can't read when they're 6 or 7. You're not worried.
I used to be.
And that was okay. So we think about brains and development. I've always said, like, does it matter if you are able to read a college textbook by 18 or 24, or like, it doesn't really matter if the average American is illiterate at 5th grade reading level. Then as long as you get to the 5th grade reading level, you can say that you're like everybody else. Like, I never really understood the pressure that we have around the age and the learning, because up until 5 years old, we're like, oh, some kids walk early, some kids don't walk early. And then we enter school, and now all of a sudden you're behind. Exactly. And the labels that we put on kids so early. I didn't have the ADHD diagnosis, but in 1st grade, I was failing penmanship and math. Mm-hmm. And my mom had gone through her own tough school. And so she was not going to let that happen for me. And I was putting 0 and 1 for every math problem. And the teacher never asked me. Mm-hmm. Like, it wasn't like I was right. 0 and 1s. That was it. So my mom asked, did you ask her? Because I know she can do this work. And so Mom comes out in the hallway, because that's where they put you for teacher conferences. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, we get extra reading time when we finish the math test, and the math test is timed, and I'm slow at math. So I just put 0 and 1s because I wanted to finish my book. And also I'm in the 2nd highest level reading group, and I've already read the highest level reading group's book. Mm-hmm. So that's a classic ADHD motivation system, right? I am motivated by things that I want to learn and that light me up. And I'm not motivated by your stupid test right now. I already know I can do this work. And so they stopped grading penmanship the next year, and I got into the higher group, and my math was fine until long division. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I grew up, believing that I was smart. I didn't make the highest level group because I didn't know how to study in 7th grade when they took us to those tests, and I didn't learn fractions and how to read a clock because I wasn't motivated by it. I had my friend Katie Schoonover do my math homework, and she's an accountant now, and I was a history teacher. I did her social studies homework. So kids know what they're lit up by. They do. And you're absolutely right. I don't know why we hyper focus on children between the ages of 5 and 17, because I promise you, no one has ever asked me when I was potty trained. At any job interview, in my adult life, no one ever said, so, at what point were you potty trained? Was it 18 months or was it 2? When did you roll over? Or when did you learn how to write a sentence using, correct punctuation? No one asked that. Or when did you learn, long division? Or when did you learn how to be able to convert a fraction to a decimal? They don't care. The question they ask adults is, can you do this? Can you articulate yourself? Do you know what you're good at? Can you leverage your genius? And can you get this product done? Period. I don't care when you learned how to read. And I'll tell you, where I learned how to do math was in QuickBooks with a P&L sheet. It turns out money is motivating for learning math. Isn't it though? Were my financial reports wrong? The first 2 versions? Yes. But the 3rd version, I got it right. I have the transposing numbers, whatever label they give that. I have that. No one knew that. And that's why I would get all the way to long division, and I would write 6 instead of -6 or whatever. I was always missing the So thank you. And for parents listening, if your kids are in school right now, genius that my mom gave me was they invested in tennis lessons for me. They never hired a math tutor. And
Smart.
NCAA college player here. Tennis paid for school, not math.
Smart.
Right? There was no way I was getting a math scholarship. And academically, I was fine. I got an academic scholarship too. So if we keep telling kids they're geniuses, which is why I was so drawn to the genius school.
Yeah.
We believe, if we're fish and we try to show you, I think you have that quote too, and that was in my classroom. If you tell a fish he's stupid based on his ability to climb a tree, he'll
live the rest of his life believing that it's stupid.
Exactly. Yep. And, I also had enough self-awareness as an adult to know that I had ADHD, but before, all the cups in my room are still there and the leaving the lights on is still a thing. That is where my water flows. And I found a partner whose water was just simply to turn off the lights for me. I knew that I could swim alongside him.
That's right.
Well, I could talk to you for hours, and I will talk to you again because I'm definitely going to follow up with you. But I have 3 questions I ask everyone as we come to the end today. So, what is your superpower?
My superpower is my ability to close my eyes and to be in what is not yet. As a visionary, to be able to see something that does not yet exist, to walk in it, live in it, breathe in it, touch it, to the point that when I open my eyes, I feel like I'm already there. I feel like I've already lived 10 lifetimes in that. To the point that when I speak, people are like, you've been doing this for 20 years? Like, has this school been? No, the school is just opening. So I would say that that's my superpower, being a visionary.
100% being a visionary, and it's contagious. So thank you for that. What's your purpose?
Oh, that's very simple. It wasn't simple for me to figure it out, but I've discovered that my purpose is to help others discover their purpose, which is why the word genius means so much to me. If you look at the etymology of the word, the Latin root word geniere means spirit present at birth. So there was something that we all were born with, a natural ability, something that we already have, but because of the world that we were born into, it doesn't always give space for it to be recognized or acknowledged. So my purpose is to help people from 0 to 99 discover what is that thing that lights you up on the inside, and then how can you serve others with it?
I definitely want to do your human design now. Because human design tells you, your purpose on earth. And when I read it, I was able to heal a lot because my purpose, I'm the finger in the pie. I'm here to disrupt things that need to shift and change. And you are inspiring so many people to step into their own genius. What an incredible purpose. My last question is, what's next for you?
Well, what's next for me? So during the winter, which is not my season is spring and summer, but during the winter, I'm taking a cue from nature. So what's next is during this time for me to be kind of quiet and to grow the Tao. I'm really excited about what we can do with funding. So to put some hardcore dates, we're hosting a wellness retreat, a virtual wellness retreat in our metaverse for our beachfront resort in the metaverse for people who are thought leaders of decolonizing parenting, deschooling, and unschooling. And they will be gifted our very first set of NFTs. After that, for the late winter into the spring, it will be our Web3 initiatives around funding. So our NFT rollout, my focus right now is funding, figuring out ways to fund these learning communities. I have 2 focuses, the funding and then the decolonizing parenting coaching. As more and more people, especially educators in the system, are looking to create self-directed spaces, I do not hear them being responsible for the relationship between the parent and the child. So I've made a commitment to my community that I'm going to expand that. We already provide that coaching for people inside of the Genii community. Now I'm going to double down. So to make sure that this way of living, because it's more than just a school, it's a way of life, to make sure this way of living is sustainable and cultivated, to increase our coaching for families, and then funding. So I'll be looking at, yes, Web3 and other Web2 options as well. And then our app is in our beta group, and the beta version of that will complete in June when the evaluators get to use the app to see the submissions. After that, I will propose to the DAO that we on-chain the app, that we add it to blockchain, so that when a learner makes a submission, it is now documented on blockchain as a third-party validator. There's some other fun, juicy funding opportunities inside of blockchain. And then finally, come this fall, next fall, fall 2023, we will have in-person communities here in Atlanta, where I am, in my hometown of Philadelphia, right outside of Washington, D.C. Our metaverse, the commitment is that that will even more further expand. Right now, we have about 15 children there. We want it to be close to 100 so that we can have even greater connection with kids across the country. And that's what's next, to remain in shalom, whole and complete, nothing missing, nothing broken, to remain in fun and joy and deep connection and authenticity with others as we go about doing this work. And if I do that, then when I talk to you next year this time, oh girl, oh girl, I'm gonna be a happy sister. You understand? Yes, ma'am. So that's what's next.
It has been such a pleasure to get to know you. I would love to keep in contact with you. I've got a co-working space in my future, so I want to know more, and I hopefully have a baby, and that means a child to raise and unschool in my future too.
Yes.
Hopefully, I can, we put that out there.
Yep.
And thank you for sharing your genius with us today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I always give my guests the last words. So whatever you'd like to leave people with, this is your time.
All right. Well, again, Katie, it's been my privilege to be here with you. If anyone is interested in learning how this possibility can live where they are, you can go to our site, thegeniusschool.org, and you can schedule time to meet with me or one of our directors for your genius conversation. But aside from that, my deepest request is that you do something today that lights you up on the inside, that you get in touch with your genius today. Because if we all do that, then we all will be living in a world where we are in alignment to how our water naturally flows. So do something that lights you up today, and then go play. Go play. If you have kids in your life, find a kid, play a game with them. If you don't, find some friends and go play. Amazing things happen when we're not so serious all the time, right? Bring some fun, bring some joy, bring some play into your life. So go do something that lights you up on the inside, go play. And if you want to play with us, we would love for you to join our DAO and or begin a community where you are. And you can find me at thegeniusschool.org.